We have rapper Jason Chu in the house. We have Miss America 2014, Nina Davuluri. And we have one of my co-stars from Phineas and Ferb, the lovely actress Kelly Hu. And to moderate the panel, and she's going to introduce them again, so you guys will get a chance to give them a proper welcome. But to moderate the panel, we have the Executive Director of Kollaboration Global, Christine Minji Chang. Let me tell you a little bit about Minji. As the ED of Kollaboration, Minji oversees 14 city chapters across North America. She oversees hundreds of volunteer staff and grassroots programming efforts to elevate and empower Asian American Pacific Islander artists, leaders, and community organizations. She strongly believes the creative arts can activate a paradigm shift for the exploration, understanding, and acceptance of diversity and identity. Minji Chang.
Thank you. How's everyone doing today? That performance was incredible. We were like partying back there. So happy to be here all with you. We have an amazing first panel, a really rich discussion from three incredible members of the API community. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and introduce each one real quick. So to my far right, we have Jason Chu, who is a hip hop artist and a rapper. He is from Delaware. He grew up in Delaware and graduated from Yale University. And he is telling stories of a generation wrestling with fear and joy, greed and hope, hurt and healing. He is Chinese-American rapper based in Los Angeles. Everyone give it up for Jason Chu. All right, and to my second right, we have beautiful, wonderful, talented Kelly Hu, who was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. Anyone fan of Hawaii? Yeah, got some Hawaiians. She was the first AAPI to be crowned Miss Teen USA in 1985. You have probably seen her grace the screens from TV and film in TV shows such as Nash Bridges, Martial Law, recurring roles on The Vampire Diaries, Hawaii Five-0, and Warehouse 13. She was in films such as Oliver Stone's The Doors, The Scorpion King, and X2, X-Men United as Lady Deathstrike. She is currently on the CW's Arrow as China White and Nickelodeon's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as Karai. Everyone give it up for Kelly Hu. Too much talent on one stage. And then I'm so excited and honored to present to you Miss Nina Davuluri, who is the first Indian American Miss America. Everyone, that's a good. Nina has done incredible things since her year of service. She has traveled over 300,000 miles all across the world promoting her platform, celebrating diversity through cultural competency. She's spoken at 45 different universities, including a little place called Harvard, another small place called Princeton, Yale, Duke, UPenn, and Michigan, which is her alma mater. And in addition to her own platform, she's an advocate for women in STEM-related fields as an ambassador for the Department of Energy and Education. And she has recently traveled to Kenya, India, and the UK to launch her platform and her organization, Circles of Unity, on an international level. And she's worked with different NGOs across the United States and in India, including Pratham, Majid Bus, and Girl Rising. Everyone, please give a huge round of applause for Ms. Nina Davuluri. Everyone, all you guys making differences. Well, welcome everyone. So we're gonna do a little bit of microphone passing, I guess. We'll just start off if you guys could each share maybe a quick background. You know, I gave your bio, but if you could share what it was like kind of growing up in your respective communities as an AAPI youth, that'd be great.
Sure. First of all, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you all for coming out and spending your Saturday with us. Just to touch a little bit on my background, I was born in Syracuse, New York, but mostly grew up in Oklahoma. Moved there when I was 4 years old, lived there until I was 10, and then my family moved to Michigan. So when I was in Oklahoma, I was the only Indian girl in many of my classes. I was often mistaken for Native American, granted, you know, the town we were in. But many of the cities that I lived in growing up, even Michigan, very small, conservative, predominantly white towns. And I think the moment, a really poignant moment in my memory of being a child, I suppose, growing up as an Asian American was when 9/11 happened. I was in 7th grade, and my family was the little Indian family that lived on the block, that was a nice, kept to themselves type of family, because oftentimes that's what you do in an Asian American family. You keep your head down and you work hard. And that's what my family did. And from there, after 9/11, we went to the terrorist family on the block. And so from there, there was, my house was vandalized, it was TP'd, there were hate mail, hate letters, this is when snail mail still existed, that came to our house. And I think that's a huge part of why my platform is what it is diversity and cultural competency, because I think we hear about this buzzword of diversity all the time, but how is that actually being implemented? And cultural competency is not about, agreeing with everyone's beliefs or values, it's about being able to actually talk about it in an open and respectful way, regardless if you agree with it or not. So that's a large part of what I do now, and I'm really excited to be here and hear everyone else's stories too, and looking forward to a great discussion.
Wow. I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, so I have a very different sort of experience than I think a lot of you guys have grown up with, because growing up in Hawaii and being Asian, I was part of the majority. I didn't even realize that I was a minority until I moved to the mainland. Actually, I had a little bit of a taste of it when I ran in the Miss Teen USA pageant. I was one of 3 girls that were in the pageant that were Asian. And I remember getting on the plane from Hawaii, about to compete for the pageant, and my mom told me, just before I got on the plane, she says, "Now, don't cry when you don't win, because America is not ready for an Asian Miss Teen USA." And I thought, that's so old-fashioned. Like, nobody thinks like that anymore. But unfortunately, I think she was right. I mean, I think a lot of people, even now, at this day and age, have a hard time with ethnicity and being accepting of all ethnicities. As my career progressed, I moved to Los Angeles shortly after that. I was able to get an agent right away, I think because I was Asian. So in that case, I think it actually worked for me. It set me apart from so many other young actresses and actors that had come to Los Angeles to start their career. There were hardly any of us out here. There was like me, Tia Carrera, Tamlin Tomita. That was about it. There were like 3 of us. And there were all these roles that were coming through for Asians. And in that way, I think it really did help my career. I remember, though, being told that I was never going to be on the cover of a very popular fashion magazine because I was Asian. At that time, there were no Asians on covers of Vogue or Glamour or Elle or any of those kind of magazines. And I think you're still hard-pressed to find them now. Later on, I was able to do this movie, a little movie called The Scorpion King. And I had the opportunity to be on the cover of Maxim magazine. And even Maxim magazine, who was, a huge magazine at the time, was very hesitant to put me on the cover because they didn't want people to think that it was an Asian magazine. Luckily, we talked them into it, and they put me on the cover, and it ended up being the biggest selling magazine of that time. So, it really isn't about worrying about sticking out. I think really you have to worry about celebrating your individuality. And I think when I ran in that pageant, being one of 3 Asian girls out of 51 contestants, I think it really helped me to stick out rather than being the typical blonde with blue eyes. And it made me sort of have confidence in who I was and realize that it really made me more of an individual. And I was very proud to celebrate being Asian and being from Hawaii.
Word. How you guys doing? Y'all good? Sushi, the sushi. Man, free sushi. anytime, that's why I'm here. Anytime you can get free sushis, it's a win. Yeah, so my name's Jason Chu. I grew up in Delaware, which just, there's nothing. And so, it was crazy to me because, my parents are immigrants. My mom was born in Malaysia. My dad was born in Thailand, but they're both of Chinese ethnicity. You dig? So, yeah, she smiled. It's the ethnicity. I don't know. You smiled. It's cool. And so, growing up, like, I was definitely very much, like, straight up, I actually did not think of myself even as Chinese. I thought of myself as Asian. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, growing up, I think for a lot of us, who grew up, LA is very interesting, the way race is structured here. But you guys know, across the country, like, race works differently. Like, here, people kind of know the difference between, like, Koreans and Japanese, if only because they know the difference between, like, bibimbap and, like, sushi. But where I grew up, like, literally, there were so few of us that I thought of myself as legitimately Asian American. And so, for me, working through my identity, it's a very complicated thing because it's not just external. You dig what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot internal also. It's like figuring out, who am I? Like, when my parents look at me, or, when my grandmother looks at me, they see one side of me. And then when, like, my white friends in Delaware, like, because it's not just all about bullying, right? Like, I got white homies, like, that just don't get race. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're not bad people. They're not trying to be jerks, but they just don't get race the way we do, right? Because we're living it. Like, even, this is something that I think a lot, having grown up around, very diverse cultural groups, I think it's hard to be a good white person. Like, it's easy to be a jerk. Like, it's right, because it's easy to be like a white person who's like, man, I don't care about minorities. But if you're a white person who cares about minorities, it's hard. Like, sometimes, like, you'll mess up and it's not even their fault. And they'll be like, oh, ni hao. And, like, literally, they're just trying. You dig what I'm saying? Like, they're like, yo, I know one thing about Asians and I'm trying to reach out. And then I take that sometimes as a microaggression. You guys know what that means, right? Like, I'll take that as a microaggression, like, yo, man, why you assume I speak Chinese? But they're like, dog, I just wanna know you a little. Right? They wanna connect. And so for me, a big question is not like, what is race? Like, it's not hard lines, you know what I'm saying? It's not like, yo, I mean, sometimes it is. Like, if like, little sick kids are getting, like, bullied because they're sick, like, getting punched, like, that's wrong. But sometimes it's these blurred lines where, like, everybody's trying. You know what I'm saying? People are trying to understand, you're trying to be understood, and we just miscommunicate. So how do we get past that? How can we show grace? But how can we also insist on holding them to a standard that we believe, and by them, I mean, whoever it is. That's sometimes them is us, right? I dated a Mien girl. Anybody know what Mien is? Yeah, so we got one person. So the Mien are a tribe from Thailand who was brought over after the Vietnam War. There's 25, 40,000 of them in the country, period. I dated a Mien girl, and I felt very racist because I'd sit at her dinner table and be like, oh, do I use a fork for this or do I use a spoon? Or I'd be like, oh, how do you pronounce your last name? So, sometimes we gotta admit, like, I'm, as a Chinese American straight dude, I'm privileged. And in all the ways that I need grace, how can we extend grace to others, but make that a two-way street? So I don't know, that's some things.
Dang. Wow. So just because we're crunched on time, I wanted to be able to give you guys all an individual question, kind of elaborate on what you guys had already shared. And so Nina, well, I actually have two questions for you. They're a little bit separate. You can choose which you want to answer. But one specifically, I mean, since we're here to talk about bullying and the experience that your family went through out in Oklahoma, what are some things that you feel anecdotally you did to overcome that as an individual and as a family? Do you see support from a community? And if you can also connect that to your experience, because it obviously fed your experience as Miss America. How's that connected and fed, your current path?
When I was younger, I remember when I was in Oklahoma, to touch on your first question, one of the reasons why I was bullied was because of my faith in religion, especially growing up in Oklahoma. And I remember there was a young boy, I think I was in 3rd grade, who came up to me and said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And I said, "Well, I do believe in God." And he said, "Well, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell." And I went home, yeah, right? And I went home like crying and feeling, very misunderstood. And I told my mom what had happened. And this was in, I want to say, I don't even remember when, probably 90, 93, 94. And she said to me, sometimes it's really best not to talk about our religion because not everyone will understand it. And I can understand back in the day why she might have said that, but now, 2015, absolutely unacceptable for any child to feel that way, to feel discriminated against their race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it may be, socioeconomic status. So that was certainly one of the things where my parents chose to handle it, and I disagreed with it. And so for me, I think obviously speaking up and having a voice certainly has helped me. Even when I started competing in Miss America or in the organization itself, my parents didn't tell anyone. Like, that's totally an Asian thing. Like, they were just so embarrassed that I wasn't going to med school that, like, they could not fathom that this is what right. They could not fathom that this is what I was going to do. And so when I decided to compete, I remember my sister saying, "Why are you investing so much time into this? Like, what does it mean for you?" And I said, I sincerely believe 2 to 3 years from now, Miss America will be someone who's ethnic. And that's not to pull the race card. That's not to say, pick me, I'm brown. It was just really timely for the organization. You were so way above, like, well beyond your years when that happened, which is incredible. And so the night I won, obviously, there was a significant amount of backlash, which I'm sure, Kelly talked about and she experienced as well. I was called a terrorist. I was mistaken for Muslim. I was called Miss 7-Eleven, which was probably one of my favorites, I must say. Right. But that being said, I think I have to say there was a silver lining, and for every negative comment, tweet, or post, I received hundreds, if not thousands, of positive remarks coming from younger generations. And obviously, our younger generations is what's going to shape our future, and I think there is a strong voice, especially with the power of social media. It was really, really insightful, and that's what Circles of Unity is also about. And so that was kind of the way, my choice, a certainly unconventional path, but hopefully effective one.
Thank you very much. Kelly, we had exchanged a couple of emails, and you had mentioned that you had a unique experience with bullying kind of on both sides. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would be a hypocrite if I just sat here and said I was bullied. But there was a point in my younger years in elementary school where I was dealing with a lot of issues at home, and I had an older brother who picked on me all the time, but he was also abused by my father, and so it just kind of went down the chain. And when you're the youngest in the family, it stops there. Well, it didn't just stop there. Unfortunately, I also became a bully because of that. And I, picked on other kids on the playground and things like that because I was rough. I could fight, unfortunately. Now it works. Now it works for me. But yeah, I was on the other side of it as well. But it wasn't until I got into the 7th grade where I had to change schools and I didn't have any friends, and I became the weird kid. I thought I was an actor and a model, and I was in the 7th grade with permed hair and braces, and I had no friends, and all of a sudden, I was the odd one out. I thought I was trying to be like an individual, hoping that I could start new trends, but when you're the one starting the new trend and nobody's following, you're just weird. Yeah. And so I was literally the most picked on kid in the entire school. Kids would spit at me. I would get into fights. I couldn't go to any public like football games or anything outside school grounds because I didn't have any protection. Fortunately, I went to a private school, so that was the only thing that kept me from getting beat up in school. But eventually, I made a friend. Somebody who was my friend in elementary school got into my school in high school, and I was able to overcome it. even winning the Miss Teen USA pageant didn't really help with the bullying. My car got scratched, and food was thrown on it. If I left my windows open, I would get like ice cream in the seat of my car, or terrible things that kids do. But guess what? I'm a model and I'm an actress, so I think I win out in the end. If I could have. If I could have had a conversation with my 12-year-old self, who was, by the way, suicidal at that point. I mean, I was bullied so badly in school that I would cry every day to my mother, and I would beg her to take me out of school because I could not stand it. I wanted to be homeschooled. There was no such thing as homeschooling back then. But it was really serious. But if I could have a conversation with that 12-year-old kid, I would tell her, hang in there, because life gets so much better. Life got really beautiful, and I'm so grateful to be here.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really incredible story. And moving on to Jason, you and I had talked about, you growing up in Delaware and kind of being away from the coast where there's a lot more diversity, and then that influencing you becoming this hip-hop artist and rapper. How do you feel like what you've witnessed being a hip-hop artist, has that been impacted by the race conversation, the identity, the conversation that you were just mentioning, and has bullying been a part of that, or do you feel just you're taking in the outside and impacting it through your music?
Chinese kid in Delaware, lot of AP classes. You know what I'm saying? A lot of AP classes. Yeah, right. But what I loved about hip hop, so my boy Yusef, he was born in the Bronx. He grew up in Baltimore, and then we wound up at this charter school together in Delaware. He put me on to hip-hop music, like really, beyond the radio and all that. And what I loved about it was, like, in hip-hop music, in hip-hop culture, like, there was this sense of valuing the different and the disrespected. You know what I'm saying? It's wild. Like, you watch, like, 8 Mile. Anybody seen 8 Mile? Yeah, all right, word. You definitely have seen 8 Mile. She raised her hand very high. So, like in 8 Mile, right? The final, spoilers. It's a very old movie, so spoilers. The final rap battle, right? Eminem's character wins the final rap battle by pointing out that the dude he's rapping against went to a private school and has, like a lot of privilege. And that's what I love about hip-hop culture, is that, like, in this culture that I discovered and that welcomed me in and brought me in, standing out is actually, it's honorable, it's noble. Like, if you're following that mainstream path, if you're just that popular kid, that's actually a disadvantage. And so I've discovered, especially as a Chinese American person, I'm realizing that in my community, there's so much about Confucian values and ethics that tells us mainstream is what's powerful, right? Like, come in and assimilate in. And I feel like hip-hop culture is a very beautiful counterbalance. It shouldn't replace it, but it balances out so much of what I've been taught. My parents love me, but they taught me, like, find this path and walk along this path that many others have walked, the safe path. And hip-hop has taught me, find your own path. And it's not even necessarily better, but it's just as powerful. It's just as possible. So that's why I do what I do.
Thank you. I want to do a quick time check with Michelle. Okay, we'll just lean into it. Well, I mean, I think that in closing, Kelly, you shared such really great pearls of wisdom that you, and it touched upon the last question I wanted to ask the group. If you could speak to your younger self or to a young person today, in a sentence or two, what would you say to them in terms of coping and overcoming bullying?
When I was in 6th grade, there was a young boy whose name shall remain nameless. And he said, "Oh my goodness, Nina Davuluri has a bigger mustache than my dad." And it was kind of true at the time. But nonetheless, still hurtful. And, I always, when I speak with younger students, I always say, this gentleman can, well, he's not really a gentleman, but this boy can become the next, CEO, senator, even president of the United States. And I will forever remember him for that one comment. So how do you want to be remembered? Ask yourselves that, because your words have an impact on others, and you have a choice to influence them in a positive or negative way. So make the right choice.
We all discovered wax. Like I said before, hang in there. I think that's everything. When you're young, everything just seems so much more important than it really is. And if you can get a chance to gain perspective and sort of step outside of your world for even a second, all of those little problems that you're having at the moment, even as adults, I mean, God, we're all so prone to making our lives feel so important. But if you just step outside of it for a second and you realize just how little all of these problems are, if you get involved with things that are more important, it makes you realize how you can become part of a group that can make changes. Then your life doesn't seem so difficult. It won't seem so hard to deal with your little challenges when you realize what challenges other people have to deal with. And hang in there, because once school is over, all those popular kids, nobody cares.
Bad news to the popular kids in the audience. I think what I'd say to myself is that like no great story happened without an adversary, right? Like Harry Potter gotta have he who shall not be named. And so, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good. Like whenever I talk to youth, like bullying is it's not good, but that's on them. For them to be like that, that's them. We only can control what we do. And we can choose to respond by wilting, or we can choose to respond by, as you say, leaning into it. And the bigger the challenge, the stronger we'll be at the end.
All right, well, with that, we're going to wrap up this panel. Thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your stories with all of us. I feel like I learned so much, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Did everyone have a good time listening to this panel? Because I sure did. Thank you, Maulik, and thank you to Michelle and to Breen for putting this together. And